but Devi Ayyagari are a master's degree. They have a master's degree in computer science from the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, and are currently pursuing their PhD in computer science at Dalhousie University under the supervision of Dr. Christopher Whidden, and in collaboration with Joshua Barnes at NRC and Corey Morris at DFO. Their research focuses on using machine learning to detect and classify different species of fish in underwater video data. Hopefully there's no issue connecting or sharing for Devi.
Best. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Perfect. Hello, everybody. I am Devi Ayyagari. I'm a first-year PhD student at the Faculty of Computer Science here at DAL, studying under the supervision of Dr. Christopher Whidden, working in collaboration with Joshua Burns at NRC and Corey Morris at DFO. My research focuses on detection and classification of different species of fish using deep learning. The data set used for this research has been acquired by placing underwater cameras along the small portion of the Northeast Newfoundland Slope Marine Refuge. This is a marine protected region. There is planned seismic oil activity in this region in the near future. And so we would like to study the impact of seismic oil drilling on the marine ecosystems in this region. That was the motivation for conducting this research. So the cameras have been placed at a depth of about 450 to 500 meters to acquire this data set. Along with cameras, light source to compensate for the absence of meaningful sunlight at these depths, and bait to attract fish were dropped on the ocean floor. Here's a little sneak peek at some sample data frames and how brightness varies. Then contributes to very low average brightness in this data set. And as the battery of the light source depletes, the average brightness also decreases. Here on the bottom right, we see how brightness varies with time in a day. The sample A is picked from a video at the highest battery with the highest battery, and we see that the quality of the brightness in this video is pretty good. But as time progresses, here the sample C has been picked from a video with lowest battery towards the end of the day. And we see that we can hardly detect any objects here in this frame. The bottom left graph here shows the average brightness across the data set. And we see that about 90% of the videos in this data set have brightness less than 18 units. And for reference, this frame here, the frame sample A, has brightness of about 20 units. So this low brightness in this data set coupled with this varying brightness presents an interesting challenge for the application of machine learning algorithms on this data set. A few other challenges that are presented with this data set are some shadows. This makes it harder for the machine learning algorithm to distinguish between the object and the shadow itself. And then sometimes the fish are occluded behind certain objects, which again makes detection hard. And there's also sometimes confusion with the background. Fish tend to blend with the background itself sometimes, and that makes the detection of these species hard. Another challenge, usually machine learning algorithms struggle with class imbalance. What happens is that the machine learning algorithms tend to focus on the features from the species that have larger abundance and try and ignore the features from the classes that have lesser number of samples. In our data set, we have about 11 species of fish, with the most abundant species being cod and the least abundant species being turbot. About 24 frames have fish that haven't been able to be successfully identified by the fish expert at DFO for reasons unknown to me. But yes, this class imbalance, the significant class imbalance present in this data set, present a challenge for the application of machine learning algorithms on this data set. We have two objectives in our research. One is to automate detection and classification of different species of fish in this data. We would also like to quantify the number of samples of each species of fish that are required to train a good machine learning model. As we have seen here, we have significant class imbalance. So understanding how many samples of each species of fish are required would help both our training and annotation efforts. So we decided to simplify the problem by just training a model to detect and classify a single species of fish, cod. We choose to go with the YOLO family of models. YOLO, you only look once, family of models, quickly scans a frame, divides it into a square by square grid. And in each square by square grid, it tries to identify regions of interest and assigns confidence values to each identified region of interest. Parallelly, it also assigns a class probability map to each of the grid, which basically computes the uncertainty involved with guessing the presence or absence of a particular object, particular class object in a specific grid. And then it proceeds to aggregate all the identified regions of interest from each grid and finally arrive at its detections. For example, in this frame here, the model identifies a dog, a bike, and a van as the objects present in this particular frame. We choose to use YOLO v4 for all the experiments described in this presentation. In order to evaluate the performance of these trained models, we need to understand two metrics. The first one is intersection over union, also IOU. It is computed as the ratio of overlap, ratio of area of overlap and area of union between the ground truth bounding box and a predicted bounding box. So here, this blue box shows the ground truth bounding box, which is the annotation manually annotated by an expert. And then this violet box, let's say, is predicted as fish by the machine learning algorithm. The intersection over union between these two is about 25%. And so the IOU would be 0.25. Another metric used to assess the performance of the models is mean average precision. This is computed as the weighted average of precision over different IOU thresholds. And the weight is the increase in recall from the previous threshold. This number, this map presents a single number that balances both precision and recall to describe how efficiently this model detects and classifies fish. We were able to train a model to detect and classify fish. In order to quantify the number of samples of each of cod required to train a good machine learning model, we sequentially subsample sets of 200, 500, 1,000, and 2,000 cod frames from our training set. For machine learning algorithms, we would expect the performance of the model to improve with larger amount of data. In order to quantify the performance of these trained models, we observe how MAP varies with IOU thresholds. We see that as we increase the IOU thresholds, the MAP value drops. We expect this because at high IOU thresholds, we are placing stricter constraints on what we define as a good prediction. But contrary to our hypothesis that larger amount of data contributes to better performance, we see that the model trained with 200 cod frames depicted in this blue line here performs better than the model trained with 500 cod frames depicted by the orange line here. When we looked at the data used to train these two models, we realized that the data used to train the 500 cod models, 500 cod frames had some really bad video quality. In order to mitigate the bias that can be caused by a few data points, we decide to randomly subsample sets of 200, 500, 1,000, and 2,000 cod frames from the training set. This also gives us the added advantage of training with a data set that is more representative of the test set. These models perform as our hypothesis indicates, which is the models trained with larger data have better performance. But we also noticed that the models trained with 1,000, 2,000, and 5,000 cod frames, the ones depicted by green, red, and violet, perform comparably to the model trained with all the cod frames depicted by the brown line. So we think that about 2,000 cod frames at an IU threshold of 0.4 are good parameters to train a good machine learning model to detect and classify cod with this data set. Now we have trained models on cod frames and validated them on cod frames. But a video in general has about 60% of frames with just water, no fish in them. So how do the models trained with cod frames perform when evaluated on full videos. We notice about a 10% reduction in MAP when we evaluate the models trained on guard frames on full videos. We hypothesize that adding water frames while training will help with this and boost the performance of these trained models on full videos. But then that raises the question of how much water do we train with? So in order to figure that out, we added about 25%, 50%, 100%, and 200% water frames along with guard frames while training. We noticed that for the models trained with lesser amount of data, adding water helps. But for the models trained with larger amount of data, adding water doesn't make much of a difference. And the 10% reduction in MAP still on average just stands. So our hypothesis has been proven wrong. This we identify as scope for future research to understand how we can improve performance on full videos. As we were able to successfully classify and detect card with this data set, we proceed to train on larger number of classes. We realized that we have only 6 classes with at least 2000 frames in our training set. So we train models to detect and classify 6 species of fish: cod, rough-head grenadier, tawny skate, redfish mentaya, striped wolffish, and Atlantic halibut. Our learnings from training a single class of fish extend pretty well to the models trained on all 6 classes of fish. That is about 2000 samples of each class of fish at an IU threshold of 0.4 are good parameters to train and classify a YOLO V4 model on this particular data set. So we conclude by saying that it is really crucial that we train models with a data set that is representative of the test set. For this data set, 2000 samples of each species of fish and an IU threshold of 0.4 are good parameters to train a good machine learning model. Also, while validating on full videos with water frames, just training with water frames is in itself not sufficient. We plan to perform this classification analysis to understand why we do not see or where the false positives or true negatives come from, and employ strategies like data augmentation to understand to improve the quality of performance on full videos. For future work, we intend to extend this to all species in this data set. As we have seen, we have a lot of species with very few samples. We would like to explore generative algorithms to augment the data for these species, and also use techniques like few shot learning that are pretty good at detecting and classifying species with very few examples. We are also interested in understanding what is a good wattage of light source that can be used to capture such a data set. So we would like to study how the confidence of the prediction varies with light intensity. These models have been trained on data acquired at large depths. We would also like to see how these models would generalize to data acquired at shallow depths, same species of fish, but with different habitat. We're also interested in seeing if we could track and identify individual fish in each video. We would like to estimate abundance of different species of fish. In this data set, we hope to deploy full automated pipelines that could generate reports of fish health, fish statistics to monitor marine ecosystems in this region. We hope that these monitoring techniques will enable the safe development of tidal power, safe development and application of carbon removal technology, better monitoring of at-risk fish in marine protected areas, and other upcoming solutions to address our climate threat. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present at this workshop. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any now.
So there's one in the chat here. Why use the YOLO family instead of, I'm sure it's not YOLO, but that's how I'm going to say it, instead of the RCNN, and which version of the YOLO are you using?
So I am using YOLO V4 for the experiments presented in this presentation. We are doing some research with YOLO V7 right now, but that's still ongoing. And why YOLO instead of RCN? I think it's because during deployment, I think YOLO has faster speeds for classification and detection compared with RCNN.
What marks do individual fish have that you can see?
So cod has this really long streak across its body that is pretty identifiable. And rough-head grenadier has this really large eye that is very telling. Then I think the skates and the halibut are mostly stick to the floor in the mud. They're rolling around in the mud, and you can see that one of them has longer tail, one of them does not. I forget which is which. I think the skates have larger flaps, which also make them more unique. Yeah.
Excellent.
No.
Go ahead.
No, I think I'm not discriminating one halibut from another. I'm discriminating halibuts from cod.
All right.
I hope that clarifies that.